Welcome back to our LATAM Expansion Insights, your go-to podcast for all things related to growing your business in Latin America. I'm your host, Chris Danks. In our previous episode, we specifically looked at the LATAM region from a global expansion perspective. We also touched on legal entity versus employer of record. Today, we're going to dive a lot deeper into the employer of record, or the EOR model, as it's often known. So joining me today are our special guests, Becky Ospina, a founding member of TLC with over 20 years of HR leadership experience, Casey Dudley, another seasoned HR leader, Alex Warren. Alex is the VP of Solutions Consulting at Velocity Global, combining top-tier HCM technology with global HR practices. Previously, as VP of Customer Experience and Delivery, Alex led teams to achieve employer of record excellence and supported global expansion efforts. Alex has 15 years of experience in private, startup, and non-profit sectors, expertise in international expansion, talent acquisition, and HR. So stay tuned for an interesting discussion that will help you understand how an EOR can facilitate your entry into the LATAM market. So welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm thrilled to have Becky Ospina with us again, and joining us for the first time are Casey Dudley and Alex Warren from Velocity Global. Becky and Casey bring a wealth of experience in HR and international business expansion, while Alex will provide crucial insights from the vendor perspective, particularly on global expansion, cross-border growth, and compliance. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So happy to be here.
To start, Alex, could you briefly remind our listeners what an EOR, or an employer of record, is and what it does for businesses?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So an employer of record is a third-party organization that becomes the legal employer of a company's distributed workforce. This actually enables companies to swiftly and compliantly and cost-effectively hire anywhere in the globe without the need to set up local HR entity payroll infrastructure. It's predominantly leveraged in the context of mitigation of risk and costs associated with new market expansion, where you're testing efficient remote talent capture, pre-funding and IPO readiness work, as well as a mechanism to compliantly transfer employees in instances of merger and acquisition. Ultimately, an employer of record handles all administrative aspects of employment. This includes payroll, taxes, benefits, compliance with local laws, union work where required, which really allows the company to actually focus on their core business activities in those peripheral markets.
It's great, Alex. Thanks for the introduction. So, Casey, can you expand on how an EOR facilitates entry specifically into the LATAM market?
Yeah, absolutely. So an EOR streamlines the market entry by taking over the complex and often burdensome administrative tasks associated with hiring and managing employees in a new country. Typically, your HR team will know a lot about your current country that you're operating in, but opening up in a new country has a lot of obstacles that you may not expect. So this really allows the company to start operations quickly and efficiently without the need to set up a legal entity, which can be time-consuming and expensive, and risky if you don't have the knowledge in-house. The EOR ensures compliance with local regulations, reduces risk, and frees up the company's resources to focus on strategic objectives.
Perfect. Thanks for going into a little bit more detail, and it'd be great to bring Becky back in here because Becky, as we spoke about on the last podcast, I know you have a lot of experience in LATAM specifically. So coming from, if you like, the customer perspective, what additional benefits do EORs provide to businesses entering into the LATAM market from your point of view?
Certainly. From a vendor perspective, the EOR offers extensive knowledge and local expertise, which is critical for navigating some of the complexities that Casey was speaking about. The EOR really has that local connection, the local expertise to navigate labor laws, tax regulations, and overall setup in the country. This really helps facilitate a speed to entry into the market and scalability. and allows the business to focus on what it does best, which is running the business versus setting up a new country. It can certainly streamline and reduce stress and setup times. I found that working with an EOR really was a very seamless process.
So, Becky, just following on from that point, are there any specific industries or types of businesses that benefit more from using an EOR, or is it really applicable no matter what kind of business you are?
I definitely think it's applicable across multiple industries. I found really role specific, it facilitates the easiest entry. And so, in scalability, when you're talking about tech startups or tech roles, customer facing roles, finance roles, in my experience, having a dispersed workforce is very much about the type of roles and the types of work those folks are doing. Consulting, professional services certainly lend itself well. So I think I would really focus on the types of roles and the activities those folks are going to be doing in that specific country. In my experience, serving customers locally was a key factor. And so that was very much leveraged, especially when you would have small workforce dispersed geographically. That worked out very well.
No, really, really good to hear. I know you have a lot of experience with EORs generally, even outside of LATAM as well. So, Alex, I want to bring you back in now. Could you give us some real world examples of companies successfully using an EOR in the LATAM region?
Yeah, absolutely. And Becky, thank you so much for that overview. Perfect sales pitch for us, certainly. And I know we worked together in the past. So I brought forward, we're very much industry agnostic, right? Across certainly high growth tech, biomedical, philanthropy, nonprofits, universities. The scope, hardware, software, the scope is quite broad. The example that I brought, which is always top of mind, for better or worse these days, is cybersecurity has a huge soft spot in our heart. We actually supported a client, Rapid7, who was looking, really to secure the best talent in the globe, but wanted to also have strategic hubs in advantageous regions and jurisdictions. So a twofold approach to their global expansion needs of creating, some critical locations to really support their customer base. We actually were able to support them across a multi-jurisdictional global strategy, which did include Latin America, where they actually positioned Mexico as a key jurisdiction to operate in, which gave them two advantages. One, certainly from a cultural perspective as a U.S. company, there's a lot of ties, and additionally economics, of course, played into Mexico being a key location, as well as higher kind of English language acquisition. By utilizing their partnership with Velocity Global, Rapid7 was able to quickly enter into Mexico, in addition to a number of other jurisdictions, with full HR support, guidance, and a great supported employee experience. We have a full HR and legal team on the ground there, as well as immigration, without having to set up the burden of setting up their own corporate infrastructure. Mexico is a jurisdiction that still relies heavily on snail mail, shall we say, and wet signatures. So setting up operations there is actually a very slow process. There's a lot of efficiencies that haven't yet been accepted within kind of legal processes. Notaries are required, wet signatures are required on entity setup, employment contracts. So really us being able to provide that infrastructure accelerated their ability to move as quickly as they needed to support their business.
I know from my own experience that LATAM as a region, that's a broad statement. It's obviously a lot of countries within LATAM, but it can be more one of the more complex regions to move into generally. And I think from what I've seen, there's many variables that people need to take into account when they're setting up a a business there, whichever method they choose to do that. So just coming back to you, Becky, I know that you've worked very closely with Velocity Global, in the LATAM region before. What were the main benefits for you specifically using an EOR within LATAM? What were the reasons that you chose to go down that route?
Working with an EOR, you can really add on to the business that's already existing in the local country. And so it is very, very quick process to get that going. And then risk mitigation, as Alex was saying, around wet signatures and snail mail, there's certainly a lot of additional fraud prevention infrastructure that's going in globally. And so having out of country phone numbers, bank accounts, email addresses, local hard, mailing addresses are really going to flag for fraud as well. And so that'll be an additional hurdle, sort of proving that you are a legitimate business trying to do business in that country. And so the EOR has all of the infrastructure locally that you can just build off of, and really creates, not only from a risk perspective, a huge advantage, but also speed of entry.
So really good insights. I think in my experience, a lot of people that are new to employer of record will, try and qualify on 2 or 3 things. I think we touched on this on the first podcast actually, but really, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. I think is the thing that's really, really apparent to me, having been involved in this for a while myself. So, talking about another area, Casey, how does using the employer of record impact compliance, payroll, and HR management?
So, just sitting here listening to Alex and Becky, there are already so many benefits of using an EOR when entering into an area like LATAM where you don't have experience or expertise. And whatever I can add to this will hopefully give even more evidence of how an EOR can really help your organization. So the EOR streamlines compliance and payroll processes by centralizing these with functions with a provider that has local expertise. So of those tax and payroll laws, of those HR and employment laws. This ensures accurate and timely payroll processing, adherence to tax regulations, and proper management of employee benefits. Then on the HR management side, it reduces the administrative burden, freeing up valuable time to allow the company to focus on strategic HR initiatives rather than the day-to-day administrative task that so many HR professionals get bogged down with.
So I think in my experience as well, I think the topic of compliance doesn't usually come up till a lot later on, and I know that's an area that that's really, really important for people to look at when they're moving into a new country also. So thanks for the insights on that. Let's talk a little bit about costs. So I know it's not the only driver, but I know depending on the situation, for many, cost is a consideration at least, or in some cases, a big part of the reason organizations will move into LATAM will be to reduce their overall cost compared with, say, hiring in the US or then the domestic country, the headquartered country. So, Becky, what cost savings can businesses expect by using an EOR?
As spoken about, before, really there are a lot of hidden costs with the legal entity setup. So the EOR, you obviously have some administrative overhead costs, you have the salary costs, the benefit package costs. However, from a legal entity standpoint, typically you're going to need some kind of registered agent, you're going to need legal advice, you're going to need a tax and accountant advisor, you're going to need a payroll company, you're going to need some kind of regulatory consulting services. And so piecemealing those out and finding firms that can offer that to you can really add up. There's typically hourly rate charges where an EOR not only packages that under one umbrella, I have typically found that they are very competitively priced services, and it's very predictable, right? You can budget those costs over the annual year. You can forecast them in your revenue and expense models. where having a legal entity set up, there can be a lot of unknown costs. You didn't realize there was a regulatory filing, at particular times of the year. There's a financial audit at the end of the year. There's certainly profitability requirements. So Alex had mentioned the country of Mexico. There are some profitability type considerations that do not exist, on a global scale. And so having that expertise, not only to flag those items for your business, make you aware of them, then also to take care of them from a cost perspective. I mean, net, what we have found in my experience has been that it is a net savings to go with the EOR model.
To hear, yeah, very interesting. I know cost is always a big consideration, and once you've totaled up, the different elements, looking at salaries, EOR costs, and other factors, there's a lot more to consider than just the salary costs and the EOR costs. There's a lot more to it than that to consider when you're moving to any country, whether that be in LATAM or anywhere else. So coming back to you again, Alex, from your experience, how does an EOR impact a company's flexibility in their operations?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to double click on a few of the items that Becky said because I think they're so important when you really think about employer of record as a solution for corporate infrastructure, right? It allows faster market entry, on average 80% faster than the alternative of setting up an entity. It allows for efficiencies also on a market exit, where you may have either through acquisition, maybe acquired redundant entities, or maybe just have peripheral markets that are costing your finance and HR team valuable time and both hard costs and soft costs. Becky mentioned a few of these, right? When you think about transfer pricing, right, between entities, FX conversion, managing, different HR and regulatory changes, which we'll chat about briefly, banking, tax strategies, audits, all of these are core areas where HR and finance can be focused on the core jurisdictions of the business and driving efficiencies. And when your footprint expands because your customer base, your service, your talent, you want to expand and capitalize on, those become very costly. And so the employer of record really allows for a dynamic and nimble strategy that not only reduces hard costs, but opportunity costs within your own business infrastructure. HR is the darling of the EOR industry, and we take it even further to the CFO's office of what we're really talking about is solving corporate infrastructure of, when our chief revenue officers go to the CFO and say, I need to expand into a new region, and HR is saying, we want to hire in France, we want to hire in Brazil. These are scary conversations because these are highly regulated jurisdictions. And so the EOR really allows for the business to grow, to scale up and scale down without the regulatory tape and or the extra cost of not only entering in, but even more importantly, exiting out. On average, an entity setup and banking setup takes around 6 to 12 months. Take a jurisdiction like Colombia that has very high capital controls as a result of coming out of the Escobar eras, right, with anti-money laundering. These processes are very time intensive for HR and finance. Once the entity is set up in 6 to 12 months on average, then you have an ongoing cost of $40,000 to $100,000 of maintenance, right, annualized year over year. And so really looking at how can we support companies in streamlining their growth, and just making strategic moves where they can remain in a market but take the administrative burden off of their plate, I think is really impactful.
Interesting. I mean, have you got any other sort of specific examples about how EOR has helped a business maintain compliance in a really complex regulatory environment, Alex? You talked about, places like France. I think you referenced Colombia, very complex,
Yeah.
high risk areas. Have you got any sort of examples of that?
Yeah, I'll actually double click on Colombia. So one of our core areas of focus in the business is actually merger and acquisition and supporting cross-border transactions for our customers. We recently were actually working on a divestiture for Dragonfly Financial, who was spinning off of a much larger firm to set up an independent fintech company. Colombia was one of the markets in scope. Needless to say, entity setup timelines did not coincide with when the divestiture needed to be completed. So here we had a scenario where, highly regulated, the market itself of entry to set up really was prohibitive of the broader strategic initiative of closing the transaction on time, getting the new company set up. Velocity Global was able to partner with Dragonfly Financial, facilitate full HR gap analyses on all of the employment contracts, all of the supplemental benefits, and actually transfer the individuals and keep them whole. So when we think about transactions or acquiring companies, right, the most important piece is the human capital and making sure that people want to stay on with the company. And through Velocity Global's robust supplemental benefits program, HR program, our HR team on the ground, we're able to meet the local employees on the ground and actually retained all employees during that transaction, and we're able to hit the transaction close date.
That's really, really interesting. No, thanks for. There's been a lot of insight so far on, some of the real positive elements of EOR. So, I think it would be interesting to talk about some of the potential downsides or limitations of using an EOR. So, Becky, would you mind kicking us off on this topic, and talk to us about what are some of the challenges businesses might face?
I would say the main challenge is around navigating kind of that relationship with the EOR and who is communicating what to whom. And when you are working directly with talent locally on the ground, you're working, you may be accustomed to having a certain level of communication, not having to partner with certain folks, not having to run things by certain folks. So, for example, disciplinary action, changes in labor conditions, changes in benefits. The business may want to go in a different direction with a specific topic related to employees. And so, really engaging with the EOR and partnering with them on how that is going to work is probably the biggest challenge because it's an extra step in the process. The way that we really navigated what that was setting up kind of those expectations up front, understanding what the communication vehicles look like, how that is all going to work, and kind of really talking through that with the EOR. On the last podcast, I mentioned, having an EOR who's just a vendor and having an EOR who's a partner. Having an EOR who is a partner is key because they are communicating to the employees. They are communicating to local regulatory bodies on your behalf. And so being aligned on what those communications look like, around the messaging, kind of around your philosophy as a business, we have found that EORs that are partners want know those types of information. And so it feels like a limitation at first, especially when you're used to operating in a legal entity environment. Make decisions as you see fit and kind of implement those. There is that extra step. However, if you really do the front work to build a relationship and the foundation with the EOR, I do think it makes navigating that a lot easier and smoother because at the end of the day, it's kind of the employee experience that matters. And so making that feel like it's one cohesive experience and the messages are the same from your business, from the EOR, that really facilitates a very positive and engaging experience from an employee perspective.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, it's certainly something I've experienced as well, where there's a lot of EORs out there nowadays, and Many employer of records, are more transactional, in their mindset, and others offer a very good service level. So I would definitely agree. It's such an important component of your business that picking the right partner is very, very important. I think that offers the right service levels and ability to communicate with employees and other things. So definitely agree on that. Casey, are there any other considerations businesses should keep in mind?
Yeah, so the expansion on the topic of partnership, like to Becky's point, to Chris's point, like that's 100% key. Businesses need to focus and ensure that they choose a reputable and reliable EOR provider to avoid potential issues with service quality and compliance. You want to go with an EOR provider that you trust and that you build a relationship with. And sometimes that might take time, and that's okay. You should certainly do your due diligence and your homework and really vet providers out beforehand. But there's also not a rule that you can't talk to many people and explore those relationships, and then find that partner that really works for you and for your organization. I think another consideration is the potential limitation on the ability to scale quickly if the EOR you have has capacity constraints. So once again, you might want to work with different EORs in different jurisdictions depending on their areas of expertise and their capacity. Finally, we touched on it briefly, Becky did, on the brand presence, and we really want a partner who will represent their own organization, but they are representing us as well. So our presence might be less prominent since the EOR is the official employer. So if you're an organization that really thrives on their brand presence and wants employees to buy into being part of your organization, an EOR solution might not look the way you want it to look.
So that's certainly a lot to think about. Alex, can you provide some insights on how businesses could mitigate some of the limitations that Casey was just referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd love to just double click on Casey's point on the due diligence piece and who are you working with? When we look at the employer of record space, there's really three core models. There's a brokerage model whereby you sign up with an employer of record and then they hand you over to their in-country partner, right? And you're now dealing with time zones, multiple systems, kind of inefficiencies from a communication, and no centralized control over service. The second is going to be full self-service, right? So we've seen a lot of entrance into the space, particularly during COVID, where from a human capital management construct, everything is self-service within a unified platform. However, we're still in the people business. Right? So that's twofold. One, how do we support our HR, customers and colleagues who are navigating new, highly complex jurisdictions, unions, different maternity leaves, as well as how are we supporting employees in the moments that matter within their life, right? This is super critical. It is a self-service. Is your internal HR team equipped, and do they have the expertise that a self-service only platform is enough to support the initiative and to support your company's brand and market? And I think this is what Casey really just kind of pinpointed on, is that brand presence. Do we have a unified voice, and do we have unified values and how we are articulating to the people on the ground? And then the last model is going to be that full service, where, from our vantage point at Velocity Global, we are a SaaS company that is a SaaS service enabled company. We have a unified platform, but we have over 200 professionals on the ground between our HR professionals, payroll, attorneys, employment attorneys on the ground that are providing that direct support to our customers' most important assets. And you cannot lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, if, God forbid, someone is injured on the job, or there is a dispute, or an employee goes into labor early, that there is someone on the ground to support them in their local language who is coordinating in a unified construct with you as a customer, right? And that's where we really see some of those differences is that diligence. The other one I would point to is, a tenured global footprint, and really robust compliance and legal expertise. Latin America is a region that is highly pro-employee. Regulations change all the time. Tax regulations change all the time. And so it's not enough to just have the technology. You have to have the infrastructure in place to make sure that you are up to date and abreast of what are the latest health and safety regulations and how are those being implemented on the ground. What are the latest, expense policies in Mexico are I think some of the strictest in the globe, right? I mean, navigating these and making sure that, again, going back to your brand as a company and your values, that you're with a trusted partner that is executing against what is required by law in a fast-moving environment that changes, always in support of the employee is super important.
So, yeah, fascinating. And there's so many things to consider. And Becky, coming back, to yourself, because you've acquired these services, these employer of record services before. Would you mind just giving some? It can be very, very difficult, right? Especially if you've never used an employer of record or it's maybe new to you. What you need to qualify to understand who the best partner is for you. So, what kind of things do people need to consider when they're choosing their employer of record?
I think there's the obvious elements, right, around technology, cost, service model. Will you have an assigned rep? Are you calling a 1-800 number? Are you just doing a generic email, help at, .com kind of thing? Do you have a personal contact? Those are kind of the obvious things. But I would say dig deeper than that. Think about the future. Okay, if we wanted to part ways with an employee, what is your process for that? How would that work? If we needed a visa situation, how would that work? What kinds of resources would we have? What would you be supportive of? The banking model. Alex touched on FX charges. And so are you moving currency into the country to make payroll? Are you utilizing a bank account locally? Just depending on the type of business, what that looks like, those can definitely impact costs, but also administration processes. Again, lots of regulations around moving money all over the globe. And so, what does that look like for you? So really taking that extra step to think about some common challenges your business faces. Everything works well when it's all working well. And so, what happens when you face a problem? If there were to be some kind of an audit, what would that look like? Both, internally and maybe externally, depending on the type of business and how your infrastructure is set up. Just thinking about kind of those next steps in the employment journey, I think is super important. And then, I think Alex mentioned around having folks on the ground. And the brokerage model, are they in fact the partner you're going to be working with? Or are they just the intermediary and you're going to be working with someone else? What countries does the EOR have a legal entity? And what countries they do business in can be two very different answers. And so, really kind of taking that next step to the deep dive, it can be a pitfall to just look at cost and speed and some of those kind of, very face value type topics. So, my recommendation would be just to think about the challenges your business faces and how this EOR would partner with you to come up with successful outcomes that you'd be looking for.
Yeah, and I'd love to tap just one of the things, Becky, that I always speed is incredibly important, right? We're talking about competing for top talent. But be wary when people say I can onboard someone in Brazil in 24 hours. It takes 5 days to even register them in the government social security system. So some of these things, right? Like if it sounds too good to be true, I go back to Mexico. You have to wet sign employment contracts, right? Like some of these things, if people are saying everything can happen in a New York minute, and we're talking about Latin America, nothing in Latin America tends to happen in a New York minute. And so probe, right? I mean, ask those questions, because you don't want to be with someone that is overstepping or missing some of these key requirements that are set up within the regulatory system with intention. And a lot is built so that businesses can't take advantage of employees. So love that last point.
Appreciate the insights here, and I've actually also seen it firsthand where people are jumping onto what essentially sales conversations with the employer of records, really maybe asking about presence, cost, timelines. That's pretty much it. And I think it's really important for people acquiring the service to really drill into the key areas they need to understand before making a buying decision, really, for what to find the right partner for themselves. So I myself have seen it firsthand many times. So I think it's certainly something worth taking a big note on if you're deciding to go down the employer of record route. Alex, let's delve deeper into the compliance aspect. So what are some of the most common compliance issues that companies face when expanding into the LATAM region?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just important to note again that Latin America is very employee centric, from a government body, from a union, legacy of unions. And so when we think about, adherence to local laws, one, there's a lot of regulation that is constantly changing and being updated, that companies need to stay abreast of in relation to health and safety, the protection of employees, as well as taxation. Also, as I mentioned, there are union requirements in most jurisdictions. And so, making sure that the employer of record that you're working with really understands or if they are part of the union, what their internal processes are. This will impact employment contracts, minimum wage, working hours, overtime, even down to termination processes. As I mentioned, when we think about that partnership with HR, that extension of your team, Mexico, I think, is a really unique example where there's unique requirements as an employer within the jurisdiction that you need to be able to adhere to, and that the employer of record needs to be able to facilitate on your behalf. One of those would be meal vouchers. And meal voucher administration. This is a common benefit and actually expected by most white collar employees. So we hear the term meal vouchers, I think, from a certainly kind of a US centric or EMEA centric construct. We think maybe that doesn't apply in the white collar sector. Completely untrue, and it can be upwards of 7% of an employee's salary, right? That can be a tax free, so tax advantageous benefit. Is the local employer of record able to facilitate this? A second one would be health and safety regulations. Again, pointing to Mexico as our kind of a LATAM example. Regulations were passed with the NOM 35 that focuses on psychosocial risks at work. Employers need to facilitate annual private surveys with over 70 questions to ensure that there are actual custom programs designed to make sure that employees feel like they are in a psychosocial safe work environment. Is your employer of record facilitating this to adhere to the local health and safety regulations and requirements? And then even down to, again, there's different requirements across border around how can part-time or hourly contracts be handled. Hourly contracts are available in many Latin American jurisdictions, but they are not available in Mexico. They need to be facilitated through a part-time contract. So you really have to know the partner, and that they are able to execute compliantly within the jurisdiction, because there are a number of requirements that will be very specific and unique to each market that you're operating in.
Yeah, fascinating, Alex. And I know one of the things that's always that I've thought a lot about is how on earth, if you are in so many countries, if you're delivering these services across so many countries all over the world, you've already touched earlier on how things change just so quickly. How do you, as an EOR, stay up to date with ongoing compliance with the local regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. So this again, I think is super important when you go through the due diligence process of asking thoughtful, probing questions into how is your potential EOR partner structured to handle this at scale. Velocity Global, as I mentioned, we have over 200 HR compliance legal professionals who are constantly monitoring on the ground local regulations and analyzing and implementing these changes. In addition to that, we also have a fully vetted network of external firms that also support that work. And so we've really created a very robust network, procedures, policies to make sure that we are on top of all employee benefits, tax filing requirements, regulatory health and safety requirements, and that we're able to very quickly mobilize and implement these new policies. Another piece, we're actually a founding member of the Global Employment Innovation Organization alongside Globalization Partners and Safeguard, where we've actually established really core principles within the industry to educate regulators, clients, and employees around the benefits of the model, but also how we partner with regulators, right? The goal is that we have a very mutualistic relationship where employer of record can actually help drive faster foreign direct investment in markets, ensure that employment taxes are being paid appropriately as compared to the alternative of misclassifying individuals and hiring them as contractors. So really creating not just an ecosystem to support the monitoring and the implementation of regulatory changes, but how do we actually partner with regulators to actually really create a cohesive environment that's proactive to really bring more economic development, and really foster more employment and employee protections within jurisdictions as well.
Yeah, okay, there's a lot to it. And what about specifically in LATAM? How do you stay, up to date in the LATAM region? Are there any differences, or is it pretty consistent, across LATAM and other regions?
Yeah, I would say it's consistent across LATAM and other regions. Velocity Global, I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but has around 20 entities across Latin America. And again, we have those boots on the ground, HR professionals, local language speakers. Our regional LATAM legal team is headquartered out of our Colombian office. Plus, we have employment attorneys in other key jurisdictions, and HR professionals on the ground. So really, that full infrastructure exists in every region that we operate, and certainly Latin America is a cornerstone for us, where we have major offices and major presence.
I see a lot of companies moving into LATAM from all parts of the world, but particularly from the US. I think possibly because of the time zone. So it's been an interesting 2 or 3 years, particularly since the COVID era. How many organizations still continue to consider LATAM as part of their expansion plans. So can see how important that is.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about talent, right? I mean, there's some really great talent centers that are, more cost efficient when we look at talent scarcity that's occurring within the US. Certainly Colombia has invested significantly within different technology programs and STEM education. We're seeing a lot of movement in Mexico as well, out of Guadalajara. Where just major hubs of top young talent is really coming up. Brazil, of course, has been a longtime sweetheart, certainly a more expensive market to operate in, but also linguistically is an area where if you want to tap into, the business community, certainly there's a ton of great trade agreements within Brazil, an area that you need to move into, just with Portuguese, but a lot of really exciting movement, certainly that we're seeing within Latin America, and great talent. And I would say, governments are looking for companies to invest, and it's a really opportune time to open up your scope, and look at, are there other talent sources available, not only within technology, but within support. There's a lot of interesting investment that's occurring. So.
Yeah, fascinating. And I mean, what would be really good actually is to bring some of this to life, and in terms of like a real example. So, would you be able to share for the audience a complex compliance issue, for example, that Velocity Global has successfully managed for a client?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll bring in I'll bring in an Argentine example. So Argentina, one of the top tech hubs when we think about software engineering in the globe, very highly litigious jurisdiction. And as we know, economically, they've had, some challenges with very significant inflation, ranging from 40 to 60%. Hiring individuals in Argentina, we have often seen that, especially because of inflation, most talent wants to be hired as independent contractors, even though they are actually classified as employees. What ends up happening is a little bit of a cycle where, while things are going great, everything is fine. Individuals are acting as employees, and then once the relationship sours or matures, there's a number of local counsel who are very willing and available to kind of take companies to court, and have kind of the back taxes and all of the classification issues. We actually had a client who, proactively was looking at transitioning their population of contractors over. They knew that they had an exposure point, and were able to help them successfully transition a fairly significant portion of misclassified contractors to full-time employees, able to retain the talent through robust benefits, the employee protections that they were gaining out of it, again, that direct HR support, and really just help mitigate the risk of kind of the ongoing compliance issue. So again, I think that partnership of how can we help companies take proactive steps in markets where there's additional exposure points. And I think particularly we've seen post-COVID, regulators are becoming more and more strict around classification, around ensuring that employees are receiving their full benefits, and they are willing to enforce it. And so, yeah, that was certainly a win with helping just coordinate and really understanding our clients' corporate initiatives.
Yeah, really good. It really highlights the complexity of everything here. I think the other area that maybe we haven't touched on much yet, but we could probably do a whole episode on, is around data privacy and security. Especially given, we've mentioned many times on this podcast the varying regulatory conditions and the complex regulatory conditions across LATAM as a whole. So how do you go about handling data privacy and security across the region?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll say this, globally, data security has continued to become more and more robust, right? GDPR really out of the EU really kind of launched, I think globally, a very different conversation with regulators around how are we protecting individual citizens, etc. We absolutely have seen within Latin America a big push within data requirements and the speed of adoption really since 2020 as well. A lot of the regulation that has been adopted within Latin America is very, very similar in appearance and read as GDPR, as it pertains to the protection of individual data privacy and security. This said, for Velocity Global, you know, and just generally, EU GDPR is actually still more restrictive and is actually where we adhere to as a company. We abide by it across the globe. So it is something that we constantly monitor. At this point, GDPR remains our core standard because it has a deeper level of requirements. And how is this manifested? So one, through local data protections. We incorporate local privacy notices and employment packages as an example. We have signed DPAs with our customers, and then in addition to, of course, our security certifications and protocols, we're SOC 2 compliant, ISO 27001, and actually working on our SOC 1 as well. So all of these come into play where we're constantly monitoring, and then based on as LATAM continues to make adjustments, we compare those against our data privacy and security policies, and then make adjustments based on what is the stricter standard from an operational perspective.
Interesting. It's great that you apply such stringent data privacy and security laws across the globe. Living in Europe myself, I certainly know how strict they are from many different angles. So I think that's a really good thing. No, that's great, Alex. Thanks ever so much for those insights.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate the time.
To wrap up, we've explored the concept of an employer of record, its benefits, potential limitations, and the critical aspect of compliance today. So I just want to say thank you to Becky, Casey, and Alex for sharing your valuable insights. For our listeners, remember that choosing the right expansion strategy is really crucial, and it depends on your specific business needs and goals as to which direction you need to take. So please tune into the next episode.